She works at the Mafia's club to help her sick mom, unaware. The Mafia boss watches her every night. The neon light of Club Vesper was a deep, predatory violet, bleeding onto the rain-slicked pavement of Steel Grave City. It was the kind of light that promised luxury but specialized in corrosion. Inside, the bass was a physical weight, a muffled heartbeat thrumming through the soles of Lena Moreno's cheap, sensible shoes. She balanced a tray of crystal glasses, the amber liquid inside catching the low light. At 22, Lena had perfected the art of invisibility. It was a requirement for survival here. Club Vesper was the crown jewel of the Moretti family's organization. It was a place where politicians drank million-dollar scotch with men who had blood on their hands, all while pretending they were civilized. The air was thick with the smell of imported cigars, expensive perfume, and the metallic tang of desperation that clung to the velvet ropes. Lena needed this job. She needed the thick wad of tips tucked into her apron, cash that didn't go through a payroll system, cash that went directly to the oncology ward at St. Jude's. Her mother's cancer was aggressive, and the bills were biblical. So, Lena kept her head down. She moved through the throng with a dancer's grace, a skill she utilized twice a night on the smaller, secondary stage in the Azure Lounge when the main act took a break. She never made eye contact for too long. She never smiled unless it was forced and brief. She never, ever, accepted a drink from a patron. The other waitresses and dancers, women with sharper edges and harder eyes, mostly left her alone. They whispered. They called her the Ice Princess or the Ghost. Lena didn't mind. Their whispers were background noise, just like the jazz trio playing a frantic, anxious rhythm by the bar. Cassia, a dancer with hair the color of fire and a mouth that matched, often sneered at her in the dressing room. "Don't know why you bother. Moreno, you're not cutting it here. You gotta engage with the clients." Lena would just reapply her neutral lipstick, her hands steady. "I'm here to work." Cassia, not to engage. Her standoffish demeanor wasn't an act of superiority. It was a shield. She was a lamb walking in a lion's den, pretending to be a wolf. But the rent on her small apartment was due in 2 days, and her mother's copay for the next chemotherapy round was $450. So, she kept walking, she kept serving, and she kept her eyes firmly fixed on the floor, ignoring the weight of the gazes that scanned her body as she passed. She was entirely unaware of the one gaze that mattered. Above the smoke and the noise, in a room shielded by one-way glass and armored steel, Dante Moretti sat in total silence. At 35, he was the undisputed head of the Moretti family. He had inherited the title 5 years prior when his father was gunned down. And in those 5 years, he had tripled their earnings and halved their enemies. He was a creature of absolute control. His face a mask of cold, calculated stillness. His suit was bespoke, dark charcoal, fitting him like a second skin. He didn't drink while he watched the floor. He required clarity. The room was his sanctuary and his command center. A bank of high-definition monitors covered one wall, showing every angle of the club. The entrances, the bars, the cash rooms, the dressing rooms, the alleyways. He saw everything. He had been watching her for 6 weeks. He didn't know when it started. This fixation, he'd been reviewing security footage, looking for a leak in his staff, when his eyes had landed on her. Lena Moreno. She wasn't like the other women who worked for him. The others were brassy, loud, hardened by the life. They moved with a desperate, hungry energy, vying for the attention of the high rollers. Lena moved with a quiet dignity that seemed utterly misplaced. She was beautiful. Yes, in a way that hurt to look at. Dark, heavy hair that she always kept tied back in a severe bun. High cheekbones and large, exhausted eyes that held a deep, profound sadness. But it wasn't her beauty that held him captive. It was her resilience. He watched her wipe down a table, her movements efficient, economical. He watched her count her tips at the service station, her lips moving silently, her brow furrowed in concentration. He watched her rebuff a man's hand on her waist with a cold look that promised nothing. He saw the strain in her shoulders. He saw the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. He saw the mask she wore. And unlike everyone else, he saw the deep, agonizing pain hiding just beneath it. Tonight, she was wearing the standard Vesper uniform, a short, black, conservative dress and an apron. She looked tired. Darker shadows than usual bruised the skin under her eyes. Dante leaned forward, his focus narrowing on monitor 12, the main floor. He watched her approach a table of 3 men, finance types playing at being gangsters for the night. One of them, red-faced and loud, was signaling aggressively for another round. "Miss," the man slurred, snapping his fingers. "More whiskey. The good stuff." Lena offered a curt nod. "Sir, I'm afraid I can't serve you any more alcohol tonight. We do have an excellent selection of coffee or sparkling water." The man's amusement vanished, replaced by the ugly entitlement of a drunk man denied. "Who the hell do you think you are? I'm paying your salary, sweetheart." "I'm just following club policy, sir." "Policy?" The man stood, knocking his chair back. He was a foot taller than her and outweighed her by 100 pounds. "I am the policy." He reached for her fast, his hand clamped around her arm, fingers digging into her bicep. Lena flinched, the crystal glasses on her tray rattling. Up in the control room, Dante's jaw tightened. The only muscle that moved? On the floor, Lena tried to pull away, her voice remaining low, desperate not to make a scene. A scene meant getting fired. "Sir, please let go of my arm." "Or what?" the man sneered, yanking her closer. "You'll call your boyfriend?" Lena's eyes darted to the nearest security guard, a mountain named Sal, but he was busy with a disturbance by the door. She was alone. The man gripped her harder. "Maybe you just need to be taught some respect." Upstairs, Dante Moretti didn't move. He didn't shout. He simply lifted his hand and tapped the silent microphone on his desk. Down on the floor, Lena braced herself for the impact. She saw the man's other hand rising, and she closed her eyes. It never came. 2 of Vesper's hosts, men who wore suits but had the necks of pit bulls, appeared from nowhere. They moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency. One of them grabbed the drunk's shoulder, spinning him around. The other took his arm, applying pressure to a nerve point that made the man's grip on Lena release instantly. "Hey!" the man gasped, his face paling. "Mr. D wants you to have a good night, sir," one of the hosts murmured, his voice polite. "Just not here." They didn't punch him. They didn't drag him. They simply lifted him, his feet barely brushing the carpet, and escorted him toward the emergency exit with a force that was absolute. The man's 2 friends, suddenly sober, threw cash on the table and scrambled after him. The entire incident took less than 10 seconds. Lena stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She rubbed her arm, the skin already turning red where the man's fingers had been. She looked around, confused. Sal was still at the door. The hosts had come from the VIP section, an area they almost never left. She looked up, directly at the dark, mirrored glass of the observation room. She couldn't see in, but she felt a sudden, intense chill, as if an Arctic wind had blown through the warm, smoky club. Shaken, she collected her tray and disappeared into the kitchen, unaware that the eyes of the only man who mattered had followed her until she was out of sight. The lock on her apartment door always stuck. Lena had to jiggle the key, pressing her shoulder against the cheap wood until the bolt finally snapped back. She slipped inside, the silence of the small, 2-bedroom unit a welcome relief. It smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and the faint, medicinal tang of her mother's illness. "Mia, is that you?" Lena dropped her bag by the door, kicking off her shoes. "It's me, Ma." She walked into the living room, which doubled as her mother's bedroom. Elena Moreno was propped up on a hospital bed, a rented piece of equipment that took up most of the space. She was thin, her skin pale and translucent, but her eyes were still bright. "How was it tonight?" Elena asked, her voice weak but warm. Lena forced a smile, crossing the room to kiss her mother's forehead. "It was fine. Busy. The tips were good. She held up the wad of cash she'd painstakingly smoothed out in the taxi. It was a lie. The tips had been average, and the encounter with the drunk had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. Elena studied her daughter's face. Mothers always knew. You look tired. Lena. More than usual. It's just the late hours. No, Elena said, reaching out a thin hand to touch Lena's cheek. It's in your eyes. This place. This club. It's not safe, is it? Ma, don't, Lena whispered, the lie catching in her throat. It's safe. It's a high-end club. We have security everywhere. I'm fine. We're fine. Elena sighed, the sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. I hate this. I hate that you are doing this for me. I'm doing this for us, Lena corrected gently. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she avoided showing her mother the bruising arm. Now, did you take your 8 o'clock medication? Yes, Elena waved a dismissive hand. The nausea is bad today. Lena's chest tightened. I'll get you some ginger tea, and I'll call Dr. Patel in the morning, see if we can adjust the dosage. She spent the next hour tending to her mother, fluffing her pillows, reading a chapter of a paperback novel aloud until Elena's breathing deepened into sleep. Only then did Lena retreat to her own tiny room. She locked the door, stripped off her Vesper uniform, and stood under a scalding hot shower, scrubbing her skin until it was raw. She scrubbed away the smell of smoke, whiskey, and the phantom grip of the man's hand. She leaned her forehead against the cool tile, the exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. She wasn't just tired, she was terrified. Terrified that the money would run out. Terrified that the chemo wasn't working. Terrified that one night, the security at Vesper wouldn't be fast enough. She cried silently, the water washing away the tears before they could even fall. Back at the Vesper, the last of the patrons had been cleared out. Dante Moretti sat in his office, the monitors now showing the cleaning crews. His right-hand man, Nico Russo, stood opposite the desk. Nico was older, leaner, the only man who had survived Dante's father's regime and earned a place in the new one. The finance guy, Mr. Harrison, Nico reported, his voice gravel. He's been blacklisted from Vesper and all our associated properties. He won't be back. Good, Dante said, his voice a low rumble. He was looking at a file on his desk. It wasn't a criminal file. It was a background check, compiled by the best private investigator money could buy. Lena Moreno, 22, father deceased, mother Elena Moreno, 51, diagnosis stage 4 pancreatic cancer, employment waitress, Club Vesper, outstanding medical debt $68,400, projected future costs incalculable. The file detailed the eviction notices, the high-interest loans, the pharmacy bills. It was a portrait of a woman drowning, fighting for every breath. Dante closed the folder. Most men in his position would see this as leverage. A girl this desperate, this beautiful, with this much debt? She was a vulnerability, a tool to be exploited. Dante felt something else. It was a cold, unfamiliar sensation that settled deep in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was possession. He looked at Nico. The girl, Lena. Nico's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. He'd noticed the boss's interest in the monitors. Yes, boss. She's off limits, Dante said. The words were flat, absolute. Not just to the patrons, to the staff, to you, to me. He paused. But she is to be protected. At all times, if a glass breaks near her. I want 2 men moving before the shards hit the floor. If a patron looks at her the wrong way, he's out. Am I understood? Nico was stunned. The boss didn't do this. He didn't get involved with the staff. It was messy, a liability. But Nico knew that look. It was the same look Dante had when he'd ordered the execution of the Don who'd killed his father. Understood, Dante, Nico said. Total protection, but invisible. Invisible, Dante confirmed. She doesn't know. She doesn't need to. He didn't want to scare her. He just wanted to watch her. to ensure this world, his world, didn't break the only thing he'd seen in it that was still whole. The atmosphere in the club changed over the next week. Lena couldn't put her finger on it, but the air felt different. The other girls started talking. "Did you see Mia?" Cassia whispered in the dressing room, her usual venom replaced by a tremor of real fear. "What about her?" Lena asked, pinning her hair. "She's gone. Quit, or worse. Heard she got grabbed leaving her shift 2 nights ago. Word is it was the Serranos." The name dropped into the room like a grenade. The Serrano outfit, the only real rivals the Morettis had in Steelgrave. They were ruthless, disorganized, and specialized in trafficking. "They wouldn't," another girl said, her voice thin. "Not one of our girls. Not from Vesper." "They're sending a message," Cassia snapped. "And Mia got caught carrying it." Lena felt the cold dread return. This wasn't a drunk finance bro. This was the war she pretended didn't exist, and it was walking right up to the velvet ropes. That night, her shift was unbearable. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to move. Every loud laugh from a table made her jump. She worked her short, mandatory dance set on the Azure Lounge stage, her body moving on autopilot while her eyes scanned the crowd for threats. She felt hunted. When 3 a.m. finally rolled around, she practically ran out the back employee exit. The alley was dark, smelling of stale beer and garbage. She pulled her thin coat tight, her phone in her hand, the rideshare app open. She waited. 5 minutes, 10? Then, the notification. "Your driver has canceled the trip." "No," she whispered, frustration welling up. "No, no, no." She tried to book another, but the app spun. No cars available. A light rain began to fall, cold and miserable. The alley was empty. The street beyond was deserted. She was 30 blocks from home, and the subways weren't safe at this hour. Panic began to set in, genuine and sharp. She thought of Mia. Headlights cut through the darkness at the end of the alley. They didn't approach quickly. They crept. A car, long and black and silent as a hearse, pulled up beside her. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Mercedes Maybach, a car worth more than her mother's entire medical debt. The passenger window glided down. A man in a driver's uniform looked at her. He was unremarkable, graying at the temples, his face impassive. "Miss Moreno?" Lena froze. "Who are you?" "I was instructed to see you home. The man said." His voice was calm, professional. "Mister, Nico was informed your ride was canceled. It's not safe to wait." Suspicion warred with desperation. She knew who Nico was, the club's general manager, the boss's right hand. I didn't ask for a ride." "It's been handled," the driver said. He gestured to the back door. "Please, it's cold." She looked down the dark street. She thought of the Serranos. She thought of her mother, waiting. "Okay," she breathed, making a split-second decision. "Okay." The driver got out and opened the back door for her, a gesture of courtesy that felt bizarrely formal. Lena slid inside. The interior was vast. It smelled of rich leather and something clean, like ozone. It was warmer in here, and terrifyingly quiet. The sound of the city vanished as the heavy door closed with a pneumatic thud. "Thank you," she said, her voice small. The driver just nodded. Getting back in front, a thick, dark-tinted partition separated the driver's cabin from the passenger compartment. She was completely sealed in. As the car began to move, gliding smoothly over the broken pavement, Lena glanced at the rearview mirror fixed in the center of the partition. She expected to see the driver's eyes. She didn't. The driver was focused on the road, but from the angle of the mirror, she caught a glimpse of the front passenger seat, a place she hadn't realized was occupied. All she could see was a sliver of the reflection, a man. He was sitting in the shadows, obscured by the tinted glass, utterly still. She couldn't see his face, his clothes, or his hands. She only saw his eyes, captured for a fraction of a second in the mirror. They were dark, intense, and fixed entirely on her. Lena's heart stopped. She didn't recognize the gaze, but she recognized the feeling. It was the same Arctic chill she'd felt on the club floor, the sensation of being watched by something powerful and unseen. She tore her gaze away, pressing herself against the opposite door. The car rolled silently through the sleeping city, carrying her home. She was safe from the streets, but she had the sudden, terrifying realization that she had just been trapped by something far more dangerous. The ride home in the silent black car had unsettled something deep inside Lena. She had mumbled a thank you when the driver let her out, never catching another glimpse of the man in the passenger seat. She had rushed inside, locking and deadbolting her door, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The feeling of being watched didn't fade when the sun came up. It followed her. It clung to her like the smell of Vesper's cigar smoke. The atmosphere at the club had become toxic. The other girls no longer just whispered. They stared. The protective bubble that her standoffish demeanor had once provided was gone, popped by the invisible hand that had dispatched the drunk and sent a phantom car. Must be nice. Cassia sneered at her in the dressing room, yanking the zipper on her own dress. Having a guardian angel? I don't know what you're talking about, Lena said, keeping her eyes on her locker. Don't play dumb, Moreno. We all saw it. The hosts taking out that finance prick, they don't do that for just anyone. They do that for family. Cassia's eyes narrowed. Or for the boss's new pet. Which one are you? Lena's stomach turned to ice. I'm just trying to work. Leave me alone. Just be careful. Another dancer, an older woman named Rosa, advised quietly when Cassia had flounced off. Attention from upstairs isn't a gift. Mija, it's a leash, and it paints a target on your back. Lena knew. She could feel the target forming between her shoulder blades every time she walked the floor. Even Sal, the bouncer, treated her differently, with a new, confusing deference, as if she were suddenly made of glass. The whispers were true. Someone was watching her. Someone powerful enough to command the club's most feared enforcers. Someone who knew her schedule. Someone who knew when her ride had been canceled. She's a liability, Dante. Nico Russo stood in the penthouse office, a floor above the Vesper control room. This was where the real business was conducted. The city spread out below them, a glittering carpet of sin and ambition. Dante Moretti stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to the room. He hadn't moved in 10 minutes. You're getting sloppy, Nico pressed, his voice a low gravel. The girl from the floor. You never get involved with the floor. It's your #1 rule. She's not the floor, Dante replied, his voice calm, yet edged with something cold. She's different. Different how? She's pretty. They're all pretty. She's desperate. They're all desperate. That's why they work for us. You put a target on her back, making it obvious. I was protecting her, Dante countered, turning slowly. His eyes were flat, devoid of emotion. The Serranos grabbed Mia. They're testing us, seeing how soft our underbelly is, and that drunk put his hands on her. So you discipline the drunk. You don't adopt the waitress. We have a war brewing with the Serranos. Your head needs to be on that, not on a 22-year-old girl with sad eyes and doctor bills. Dante walked to his desk, his movements measured, panther-like. He picked up a single, flawless onyx chess piece, a queen. Her mother is dying, Nico. She works a double, dances on that pathetic little stage, and then goes home to change IV bags. She's been doing it for 14 months. All the more reason to stay away, Nico argued. Compassion is a vulnerability we can't afford. It's a disease in our line of work. It gets people killed. Then consider me infected. Dante placed the queen back on the board with a soft, definitive click. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm giving you an order. Keep her safe, discreetly. The car was too much, I admit, but the protection stays. I want a man on her apartment 24/7. I want to know who she talks to, where she goes. And you will find a way to get her the money for her mother's next treatment. Cash, untraceable. She won't know it's from us. Nico sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He was a soldier, and this was in order, no matter how foolish he thought it was. And what happens when she finds out, when she connects the dots? She won't. They always find out, boss. Dante looked back at the window. Just do it, Nico. And get me everything you have on the Serrano's last shipment. It's time we reminded them why they stay on their side of the river. Nico nodded, defeated. I'll handle the girls' finances, and I'll get the Serrano intel. But Dante, be careful. This one feels different. That's why I'm doing it, Dante said. So quietly Nico almost didn't hear him. 3 nights later, Lena was chaining her thin coat to the rail in the employee locker room. Her shift was over, and the bone-deep weariness was setting in. Her mother had a chemo session the next morning at 8, and the copay was $700. Lena had exactly $412 in her tip jar. She had spent the entire night in a cold sweat, trying to figure out which bill she could skip, who she could borrow from. She opened her locker, and a white envelope, plain and standard-sized, fell out onto the floor. It wasn't sealed, it just had her name, Lena, written on the front in simple, typed print. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She looked around. The locker room was empty. With trembling fingers, she picked it up. It was heavy, too heavy. She pulled open the flap. Inside was a thick stack of cash, $100 bills. She fanned them quickly, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped them. She counted 700, exactly. A wave of nausea crashed over her, so potent she had to lean against the lockers to stay upright. This wasn't a gift, it was a transaction. It was a payment. But for what? She hadn't done anything. She hadn't accepted any offers, hadn't gone to any private rooms, hadn't broken any of her rules. Or had she? Was getting in that car an acceptance? Was her silence a yes? She shoved the money back into the envelope, her relief eclipsed by a suffocating terror. She knew, instantly, who it was from. The man in the car, the watcher. She felt owned, branded. She grabbed the envelope and stormed out of the locker room, marching straight to the club manager's office. The manager, a slick man named Russo, who everyone knew was just a mouthpiece for the real bosses, was on his way out. "Mr. Russo," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Nico paused, his hand on the doorknob, his face impassive. "Moreno, late night for you." She held out the envelope. "I found this in my locker. I think it's a mistake. It's not mine." Nico looked at the envelope, then at her face. He didn't feign surprise. He didn't ask any questions. He simply looked at her with a tired, almost paternal disappointment. "It's not a mistake, kid," he said. "But I can't accept this." Her voice cracked. "Who is it from?" "It's from the house," Nico said. A clean, simple lie. Consider it an advance, a bonus for good work. We take care of our people. "You don't," she countered, her fear making her bold. "You don't take care of people. Not like this. This is something else. I want to return it." Nico pushed her hand, and the envelope gently back toward her. "There's no one to return it to. Lena, the books are closed for the night. The decision was made. It's already handled." "Handled how?" "It's handled," he repeated, his voice firmer, the kindness gone. "Your mother has an appointment tomorrow at 8. Don't be late. Go home, Lena. Get some sleep." He knew. He knew about the appointment. Lena recoiled as if he had slapped her. The knowledge of her mother's private, painful schedule was a violation far deeper than the money. They weren't just watching her at the club. They were watching her life. She clutched the envelope, the $700 feeling like 700 pounds of lead. She had no choice. To refuse it was to refuse her mother's treatment. "Okay," she whispered, her fight evaporating, leaving only a cold, hollow dread. "Okay." She walked out of the club, not bothering to call for a ride, and ran the 30 blocks home, the envelope burning a hole in her pocket. The paranoia was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. She was caught in a web, and the spider was still hiding in the shadows, but she couldn't quit. Her mother's life depended on this dark, tainted money. The storm hit Steelgrave City like a judgment. Rain came down in solid gray sheets, and the wind howled, rattling the Vesper's heavy front doors. Inside, the club was packed, the wealthy patrons seeking refuge from the weather, the atmosphere charged and electric. Lena was balancing a tray of champagne flutes when the first flicker happened. The lights dimmed. The bass from the speakers stuttered, and then, with a groan of dying machinery, the entire club plunged into absolute darkness. A collective gasp followed by nervous laughter, then a rising tide of shouts. The music was gone. The neon was dead. Only the tiny, battery-powered emergency lights cast a sickly green glow over the exits. "Stay calm," Nico's voice boomed, magically amplified. "The backup generators will kick in just a moment. Please stay where you are." Lena was frozen in the middle of the floor. Her tray held high. She could feel the panic from the crowd, a restless, surging energy. This was bad. A blackout in a place like Vesper was a security nightmare. Suddenly, a presence was beside her. Not a patron, someone who moved with purpose in the dark. "Are you all right?" The voice was deep, impossibly calm. It wasn't a shout. It was spoken at a normal volume, yet it cut through the din as if they were the only two people in the room. Lena turned. A man stood next to her, a silhouette against the green exit light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated an aura of absolute, unnerving stillness. I think so," she stammered. "Good, don't move. People will start to panic. Stay here." Before she could process his words, the backup generators roared to life. The main lights didn't come on, but the amber-colored wall sconces and the bar lights flickered on, bathing the room in a warm, apocalyptic glow. And Lena finally saw him. He wasn't a bouncer or a host. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit that looked like it had been woven from shadow. His hair was black, his jaw sharp, and his face was a mask of cold. Stunning beauty, but it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, assessing, and held a frightening intelligence. He looked at her not like a man looks at a waitress, but like a king surveying his most prized possession. She knew, instinctively, this was the man from the car. "You're shaking," he observed. He didn't reach for her, but his gaze was as heavy as a hand. "The dark," Lena lied, her tray rattling. "It just startled me." "It's not the dark you should be afraid of in here." His eyes scanned the room, which was already calming under the renewed light. He seemed utterly unconcerned by the chaos. "Who are you?" Lena asked, the words out of her mouth before she could stop them. His gaze snapped back to her. A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his features. "I'm the owner." "You're Mr. Moretti?" she whispered, her blood running cold. She'd heard the name. Everyone had, but no one ever saw him. He was a ghost, a legend. "Most just call me Mr. D," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, "and you are Lena." It wasn't a question. He knew her name. He knew who she was. This was him, the Watcher, the man who had sent the car, the man who had paid for her mother's chemo. "How do you know my name?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Dante stepped a fraction of an inch closer. She could smell his cologne, clean, sharp, like sandalwood in cold air. "I make it my business to know everything that happens in my club, and everyone." His intensity was suffocating. He wasn't threatening her, but she felt more threatened than she ever had in her life. There was a raw, coiled power in him that made the drunk from last week seem like a child. And yet, beneath the coldness, she felt something else. A pull. A strange, magnetic curiosity that terrified her even more. "The power will be back on soon," he said, his voice dropping. "Go to the staff room. You're done for the night." "I can't. My shift isn't over." "Your shift is over," he stated. It was a command, wrapped in the silk of a suggestion. Nico will arrange a car for you, a safe one. He looked at her for 1 second longer, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw, and then he was gone, melting back into the shadows of the club just as Nico appeared, barking orders into a walkie-talkie. Lena stumbled away, her legs weak, his calm, dark eyes burned into her memory. She didn't take the car. She fled. She ran out the back, ignoring Nico's call, and plunged into the stormy night. She needed the rain, the cold, the reality of the street to wash away the feeling of his gaze. She was 2 blocks from her apartment, sprinting down a deserted, rain-lashed street, when she heard the footsteps behind her. They were heavy, fast, splashing through the puddles. It wasn't a Mr. D. This was different. This was hungry. "Hey!" a rough voice called out. "Slow down, sweetheart. No need to run." Lena didn't look back. She clutched her bag and ran harder, her lungs burning. She heard a second set of footsteps, 2 of them. She fumbled for her keys as she rounded the corner to her building, but a hand grabbed her, yanking her back. She spun, slamming her back against the brick wall of an alley. 2 men, their faces skeletal in the dim streetlight, blocked her path. They weren't from the club. They were Serranos. She knew it from the crude scorpion tattoo on one man's neck. "Look what we found!" The scorpion-tattooed man grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "One of Moretti's little birds, all lost in the rain." "Please," Lena begged, her voice trembling. "I don't have any money." "We don't want your money, Princesa," the other one said, stepping closer. "We want to send a message to your boss." He reached for her, and Lena screamed, kicking out, her heel connecting with his shin. The man roared in pain, but the other one grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. "Stupid hour," he hissed. Tires screeched on the wet asphalt. A car, matte black and low-slung like a predator, mounted the curb, its high beams pinning the 2 men in a blinding white light. It wasn't the Maybach. This was a sports car, an engine roaring with pure, unadulterated rage. The passenger door flew open. "Get in." It was Dante Moretti. He was alone, his face a mask of such cold fury that the 2 Serranos actually took a step back. "Lena," he commanded, his voice a blade in the night. "Now." The man holding her hair hesitated, confused by this sudden appearance of the Moretti boss himself, alone. Dante used that hesitation. He was out of the car in a flash, moving with a speed that was inhuman. He didn't pull a gun. He didn't need to. He struck the man holding Lena, a single, brutal, open-palmed blow to the throat that made a sickening sound. The man collapsed, gagging, his hands flying to his neck. The scorpion-tattooed man lunged. Dante intercepted him, grabbing his arm, twisting it behind his back with a sharp, wet snap. The man screamed. Dante slammed him face first into the brick wall, the sound echoing in the narrow alley. He turned back to Lena, his chest heaving, his dark eyes blazing. He wasn't the calm, controlled owner from the club. This was the monster they whispered about. "I said," he breathed, "get in the car." Terrified, sobbing, Lena scrambled into the low-slung seat. Dante got in beside her, threw the car into reverse, and tore out of the alley, leaving the 2 men broken on the pavement. He drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He wasn't driving her home. He was heading downtown toward the glass spires of the financial district. "Where are we going?" she finally whispered. "Somewhere safe," he said, his voice still tight with adrenaline. He pulled into a private underground garage, killed the engine, and the silence that fell was deafening, broken only by Lena's quiet, shuddering breaths. He didn't move, just stared straight ahead. "You should have taken the car I offered," he said. "I was scared." "You were stupid, Miwing," he snapped, turning to her. "You were scared of me, so you ran into the arms of them. They would have hurt you. Lena, they would have broken you and left you in a dumpster to send me a message." "How did you find me?" "I told you. I have a man on your apartment. He called me the second you left the club. I've been 3 blocks behind you this whole time." He got out of the car. Come on. He led her to a private elevator, which opened directly into a penthouse suite that made Club Vesper look cheap. The walls were glass, the city lights a billion diamonds at their feet. This is yours, she asked. It's one of them, he said, shrugging out of his rain-soaked jacket. He walked to a bar and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. Lena stood in the middle of the vast, empty room, dripping on the marble floor. She was finally putting the pieces together, the hosts, the car, the money, the rescue. This wasn't just Mr. D, the club owner. You're him, she breathed, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. You're Dante Moretti, the boss, the one they talk about, the head of the family. Dante took a slow sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of the glass. He didn't deny it. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. She sank onto the edge of a massive white sofa, her hands clasped in her lap to stop them from shaking so violently. She was in the lion's den. She was alone in an armored penthouse with the most dangerous man in Steelgrave City. He walked over and sat on the couch, not next to her, but at the other end, close enough to be a threat, far enough to be a courtesy. He watched her hands tremble. You're safe here, he said. No one can get to you here. Safe from them, she whispered. But am I safe from you? The question hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Dante finished his drink, setting the glass down on the table. He looked at her, his gaze intense, possessive, and filled with a loneliness that mirrored her own. I could have had you 100 times, Lena, he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. I could have called you to my office the first night I saw you. I could have bought your debt, owned your apartment, made you do anything I wanted. God knows you were desperate enough. She flinched at the truth of it. But I didn't, he continued, leaning forward slightly. And I'm not going to... That's not what I want from you. Then what do you want? She cried, the tears of terror and confusion finally breaking free. Why are you doing this? Why me? Dante looked at her, his cold mask cracking, revealing the man beneath. Because, he said, his voice raw, I've been watching you for a long time, Lena. That night in the penthouse was a blur of adrenaline and sterile silence. Dante gave her a room, a vast empty chamber with its own bathroom, and left her alone. When he didn't lock the door, she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a silk robe she'd found, and watched the storm break over the city until the gray light of dawn. In the morning, the man who had driven her in the Maybach, the one with the impassive face, drove her home. He said nothing. When she got to her apartment, her mother was still asleep, unaware of the night's horrors. Lena called the club and feigned illness. She couldn't go back. Not yet. She couldn't face the whispers, and she certainly couldn't face him. But the next night, she had no choice. Her mother's medical fund was depleted, and the $700 from the envelope was already gone, eaten by the pharmacy and the electric bill. When she arrived at Vesper, everything was different. Nico Russo called an all-staff meeting before the doors opened, a rare event. He stood on the main stage, flanked by 2 of the club's largest hosts. "Listen up," he announced, his voice carrying over the nervous shuffling of the waitresses and dancers. Due to the recent and escalating security concerns in this district, Mr. Moretti has authorized a new club policy, effective immediately. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. All female staff will be provided with a security escort to a designated safe transport service at the end of every shift. There are no exceptions. This is not optional. This is for your protection. Anyone who has a problem with it can clear out their locker tonight. The room was silent, but the resentment was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Cassia shot Lena a look of pure, unadulterated venom. The new policy was a sham. Everyone knew it. This wasn't for all female staff. This was for her. This was Dante Moretti putting a velvet collar on his new pet, and in doing so, he had painted a bullseye on her back. Lena tried to disappear. She did her job. kept her head down, and refused to look toward the one-way glass of the control room. She tried to distance herself, to pretend the night in the alley, the night in the penthouse, had never happened. But it was impossible. A black car, different from the Maybach, but just as imposing, was waiting for her at 3 a.m. The driver, a man built like a refrigerator, simply opened the door. Lena got in without a word. She was a prisoner of her own rescue. This became her new reality. The isolation at the club was complete. The other girls wouldn't even share a dressing room mirror with her. Lena, who'd worked so hard to be invisible, was now the most dangerously visible person in the club. She hated Dante Moretti for it. She hated his arrogance, his control, his ownership. But a darker, more confusing truth festered beneath the anger. When she was on the floor, surrounded by the grasping hands and leering eyes of the patrons, a part of her, a small, terrified part, was relieved. She knew, with absolute certainty, that no one would dare touch her again. She was safe. She was his. The two thoughts were one and the same, and she didn't know how to separate them. Her feelings for him were a toxic, tangled mess of fear and, worse, a grudging gratitude that burned like shame. The tension in Steelgrave City was a frayed wire, sparking in the dark. The Serrano outfit, enraged by the attack on their men in the alley, was pushing back. Lena was in the middle of her Azure Lounge dance set, her mind a million miles away. When the sound hit, it wasn't a gunshot. It was a deep, resonant boom that rattled the crystal glasses on the bar. The floor vibrated. A woman screamed. The music died. Lena froze on the small stage. Nico was already on his radio, his face grim. "Lock it down," and he commanded. "Front and back. No one in, no one out." "What was that?" Lena asked, rushing over to him as she stepped off the stage. Nico glanced at her, his eyes hard. "That," he said, "was the Serranos sending a message. They just hit the Moretti shipping depot down on the docks. A bomb. The war was no longer in the shadows. It was here. The danger she had been running from was now at the door, and she was standing in the very center of the target. The call came 2 nights later. Lena was at home, helping her mother with a glass of water. Her phone buzzed, and she saw the unfamiliar number, St. Jude's Hospital. Her blood turned to ice. "Miss Moreno?" a calm, professional voice said. "Your mother, Elena, was brought in by ambulance 30 minutes ago. She was found unconscious by her home health aide. She's in critical condition. You need to come." The world tilted. Lena dropped the phone, her hands numb. "Ma," she whispered, but her mother was already in the ambulance. The morning aide must have come back for something. Lena, what is it?" her mother called weakly from the bed. Lena realized she was hallucinating, the fear projecting a future that hadn't happened yet. She picked up the phone. "I'm sorry. You have the wrong... Wait." She looked at her mother, who was sitting up, looking concerned. "Mija, you are pale as a ghost." "My mother is right here," Elena said into the phone, her heart hammering. "No, miss," the voice said gently. "Your mother's aide found her on the floor. She wasn't breathing. They managed to resuscitate in the ambulance. She's here. You need to come. Now." It was a premonition. The call wasn't about the past. It was about the future. No, that wasn't right. The phone call she had just taken. Lena looked at her mother, who was now fading, her eyes rolling back. The glass of water slipped from her mother's hand and shattered on the floor. "Ma!" Lena screamed. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't dial 911. Her mother was unconscious. "Wait, the woman on the phone? She's here." Lena looked down at her phone. The call had been from her mother's aide. Her mother had collapsed. The call from the hospital? That hadn't happened. She had dreamed it. No. She shook her head, the panic making her thoughts splinter. She was holding her phone. Her mother was on the floor. She had to call for help. She dialed the emergency number, her voice a reedy, thin sound. By the time the ambulance arrived, Lena was in shock. She rode with them, holding her mother's cold hand, her mind blank. At the hospital, it was chaos. The emergency room was a blur of bright lights and sharp, antiseptic smells. They wheeled her mother away, and a nurse gently pushed Lena into a waiting room. She sat there for an hour, 2 hours. At 4 a.m, a doctor finally came out. "She's stabilized." The doctor, a weary-looking man, said, "But it's not good. Miss Moreno, the cancer has metastasized to her liver. She's septic. We're moving her to the intensive care unit." "The ICU?" Lena repeated, the words hollow. "But our insurance, I can't afford that." The doctor looked sympathetic. "We'll do what we can, but you need to speak to administration. And honestly, the ICU team here is overworked. You should be prepared." Lena's world collapsed. This was it. The end. The fight was over. She was going to lose her mother because she couldn't pay. She was sobbing into her hands when a new doctor approached, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of authority. "Miss Moreno," the woman said, "I'm Dr. Matthews, the chief of oncology." Lena looked up, confused. The chief?" "Yes. I've just reviewed your mother's case. The ER doctor is new. He's incorrect. We're not just doing what we can. We're moving your mother to the private oncology wing on the 12th floor. I'm taking over her case personally." Lena stared. "The 12th floor? That's the private wing. I don't have that kind of money." "Doctor." Matthews gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't need to worry about that. All the arrangements have been made. A hospital benefactor has taken a personal interest in your mother's case. The entire cost of her treatment is being covered." Lena's breath hitched. "A benefactor? Who? What benefactor?" "I'm not at liberty to say, Doctor," Matthews said briskly. "My concern is your mother. She's in the best hands in Steelgrave. Now, you look exhausted. Go home. Get some sleep. She'll be settled in her new room when you get back." Lena didn't go home. She stayed in the waiting room, her mind reeling. She knew exactly who the benefactor was. She waited all night. At 7 a.m, she finally left the ICU waiting area to go to the cafeteria, her body numb. When she returned, a friendly-faced nurse was adjusting the chart outside her mother's new private room. "Oh, you just missed him," the nurse said cheerfully. "Missed who?" Lena asked. "Your benefactor, Mr. Moretti. He was just here. Such a generous man, taking time out of his busy schedule. He was speaking with Dr. Matthews for almost an hour. He even looked in on your mother. He seemed very concerned." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. He hadn't just paid. He had come here. He had stood in this hallway, near her mother. He had looked at her. The fear and confusion and gratitude boiled over into a white-hot, clarifying rage. This was the ultimate violation. Her mother was not a chit to be cashed. Her family's pain was not a commodity for him to buy. She didn't take a cab. She ran, the morning sun blinding, her heart pounding with a singular, furious purpose. She ran all the way to Vesper. The club was closed, the front doors locked. She went to the back alley, the same one where he had rescued her, and pounded on the steel employee door. A very surprised, very large host opened it. "We're closed, miss." "I'm here to see him," Lena said, her voice shaking with anger. "Mr. Moretti he's not available. I'm not leaving until I see him." She pushed past the man, who was too startled by her audacity to stop her. She knew where she was going. The control room, the penthouse office. She stormed past a cleaning crew, ignoring Nico's sharp, "Lena, you can't be here!" She took the private elevator, the one he had taken her in, and slammed the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, he was there. Dante Moretti was standing at his desk, reviewing a stack of papers. He looked up, his expression unreadable, but a flicker of surprise registered in his dark eyes. "You," Lena breathed, marching into the room. "You bastard!" Dante simply placed his pen on the desk. "I assume your mother is settled." "How dare you!" Lena shouted, her voice echoing in the cavernous, silent room. "How dare you go there? How dare you involve my family in this? She's not one of your assets. That is my mother." "She's getting the best care in the city," Dante replied, his voice dangerously calm. "She's with the best doctor." "I don't want your doctor. I don't want your money. And I don't want your protection. I want you to leave us alone. You think you can just buy me? Buy my loyalty? Is that what this is?" She was shaking from head to toe, tears of rage streaming down her face. Dante watched her, his mask of cold control absolute. He let her rage, let her scream, let her exhaust the white-hot fury until she was just standing there, sobbing and broken. He walked around the desk. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was terrifying in his stillness. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He just looked down at her, his eyes stripping away her anger, leaving her raw and exposed. "You're right," he said, his voice a low, emotional rumble that seemed to be torn from his very soul. "I can't buy you, and I don't want your loyalty." He paused, and his expression cracked, revealing a deep, aching vulnerability that mirrored her own. "I'm doing it," he said, his voice raw, "because no one ever protected you. Now, someone will." Lena's breath hitched. The words silenced her. They hit the very core of her, the small, abandoned child who had been fighting the world alone for so long. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. She stared at him, seeing the man behind the monster for the first time. The tension in the room shifted. It was no longer anger. It was something else, something heavy and magnetic and terrifying. He didn't move away. "I have a dinner at my estate tonight," he said, his voice returning to its normal, calm cadence. "A business matter. It will be over by 9. He paused. "Come after 9:30. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Lena's mind screamed at her to run, to leave, to get as far away from this man as possible. He was poison. He was a killer. He was the devil. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," he said, "I think it's time we stopped watching each other through the glass." She should have said no, but she didn't. She just nodded, once. That night, she checked on her mother. She was sleeping peacefully in the quiet, private room, her vitals steady on the monitor. Lena kissed her forehead, the nurse assuring her she would call with any change. Lena went home and showered. She looked at her wardrobe, the collection of cheap, sensible clothes. She pulled out the only nice thing she owned, a simple, dark blue cotton dress. It was modest, with a high neckline and a hem that fell below her knees. It was the dress she wore to church on Christmas. A car, the same one as always, was waiting for her. The Moretti estate was nothing like the cold, modern penthouse. It was an old-world fortress of stone and ivy, nestled in the hills overlooking Steelgrave City, surrounded by a 10-foot wall. Dante was waiting for her, not in a suit, but in dark trousers and a simple black cashmere sweater that made him look younger, softer but no less dangerous. He was standing in a grand library, a fire blazing in the hearth. Soft jazz was playing from some unseen speaker. A bottle of red wine and 2 glasses sat on a low table. His eyes swept over her, and for the first time, she saw him look captivated. He seemed to appreciate the simplicity of her dress, the fact that she hadn't tried to be anything she wasn't. "I'm glad you came," he said. He poured her a glass of wine. She took it, her hand nervous. The tension in the room was electric. They talked, but it was aimless, superficial. They talked about the weather, the city, the music. They talked about everything except what they were really thinking. The jazz shifted to a slow, mournful blues track. Dante set his glass down. "Dance with me, Lena." I'm not a very good dancer," she demurred, thinking of the cheap, choreographed routines at the Vesper. "I'm not asking you to perform." He held out his hand. She looked at it for a long moment before placing her small, trembling hand in his. He pulled her to her feet, his touch surprisingly gentle. He didn't pull her close, not in the way she'd seen men hold women at the club. He was respectful. He placed one hand on the small of her back, the heat of it burning through her dress, and kept a formal distance. She rested her other hand on his shoulder, the muscle beneath the cashmere coiled and hard. They moved slowly to the music, not saying a word. This was more intimate than any conversation. She could smell his skin. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart. His touch wasn't possessive. It was reverent. He looked at her, his dark eyes tracing her features, his gaze lingering on her mouth. The pull was undeniable. He was a bad man. He was a killer. He was everything she should hate. But he was also the only person who had ever seen her, the only one who had stepped in. The song ended, but they didn't stop moving. They just swayed in the silence, the crackle of the fire filling the void. He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closing for just a second. "Lena," he breathed, his voice thick. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His lips were about to touch hers, and she panicked. "I can't," she whispered, pulling back, her hands braced against his chest. I'm not one of them, Dante. I'm not one of your women. I'm a waitress. My mother is sick. This is too much." She was overwhelmed, the reality of who he was crashing down on her. Dante didn't try to stop her. He just let her go, his expression unreadable. A flicker of pain in his eyes before the cold mask snapped back into place. "Get some air," he said, gesturing to the glass doors, the balcony. She fled, pushing the doors open, the cold night air hitting her face. She gripped the stone balustrade, overlooking the glittering, indifferent lights of the city. She heard him come up behind her, but he didn't touch her. He just stood a few feet away, respecting the boundaries she had drawn. "My father was a cold man," he said, his voice quiet, conversational. "He believed emotion was a weakness, a cancer. He taught me that to survive. You must be the one who feels nothing. You must be the one who strikes first. You must never, ever let anyone close." Lena listened, her back still to him. "I learned the lesson well," he continued, his voice laced with a bitterness she had never heard. "I took this family. I built an empire, and I did it by being colder and harder and emptier than all my enemies." He paused. "I've been alone, truly alone, since I was 8 years old. I never let anyone in. I never wanted to. It's how I survived." He moved, just a step, until her... Lena turned, her heart aching. "Until me," she corrected, her voice barely a whisper. "Until you," he confirmed, his eyes locking on hers. "You, in that ridiculous club, with your head down and your spine made of steel. You were the only real thing in that entire city. And I couldn't stop watching." She saw the man now, the lonely boy raised by wolves, who had become the king of the pack. She stepped toward him, a single, brave step. She raised her hand, slowly, and pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. The cashmere was soft, but the man beneath was solid, tense. "You don't have to be cold all the time," she whispered. His breath hitched. That simple touch, that act of her choosing to close the distance, shattered his control. He leaned in, his eyes dark with a hunger he had held back for months. His lips brushed hers, a feather-light question. She didn't pull away. She rose on her toes, her hand gripping his sweater, and met the kiss. It was slow, at first. It was a discovery, hesitant and electric. It was the taste of wine, the smell of sandalwood, and the shocking, profound relief of finally touching. Then the hunger took over. His restraint, held for so long, finally snapped. His other hand came up, tangling in her hair, tilting her head back. The kiss deepened, becoming intense, ravenous. A drowning man's first breath of air. It was all the restraint and all the hunger, battling for dominance. It was the boss and the man, all in one. He pulled her flush against him, his hand sliding from her back to grip her waist, his fingers digging in with a possessive, bruising force. Lena gasped at the sudden, rough display of ownership, the jolt of his power. The sound broke the spell. Dante froze. He instantly released his grip, his hands flying from her as if she were fire. He stepped back, his chest heading, his eyes wide with self-loathing. He looked at her, his breath ragged, his control shattered. "Not unless you want this, too," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He was terrified, not of the Serranos, not of the police, but of scaring her. He was giving her the power, the one thing no one in his world ever had, the choice. When Lena's eyes opened, the first thing she registered was the light. It was soft, gray, and filtering through heavy silk curtains. The second was the silence. It was absolute, the kind of quiet that only immense wealth could buy. She was in a bed so large it felt like its own continent. She was on top of the covers, a heavy cashmere throw draped over her. She sat up, her heart kicking. She was still in the dark blue cotton dress from the night before. Her shoes were on the floor by the bed, placed neatly side by side. She was untouched. The memory of the kiss on the balcony rushed back. The heat, the desperation, his sudden, shocking restraint. Not unless you want this too. He had given her the choice, and then, when she was too overwhelmed to make one, he had simply stopped. She was confused, disoriented, and deeply, profoundly moved. In her world, men took, they grabbed, they demanded, they coerced. Dante Moretti, the most powerful and dangerous man she had ever met, had not. He had shown her a respect she didn't know existed. She found him in the library. The fire was dead, just embers in the grate. He was standing by the window, already dressed in one of his impeccable dark suits, the armor back in place. He was nursing a cup of coffee, staring out at the grounds. He heard her enter and turned, his face a mask of polite, controlled neutrality. The man from the balcony, the one whose control had shattered, was gone. "Good morning," he said, his voice even. "There's coffee, if you want it." "I should go," Lena said, her voice small. "My mother—" "I checked with the hospital," he said, cutting her off. "She had a stable night, doctor. Matthews is pleased with her response." Lena just nodded, unsure what to say. "Thank you for last night, for the— I'll have Franco drive you home." He turned back to the window, dismissing her. The intimacy was over. It was back to business. Lena felt a strange pang of disappointment. She had seen the man behind the mask, and now he was gone, hidden away. She left without another word. When she got to the hospital, her mother was sitting up in bed, a color in her cheeks Lena hadn't seen in over a year. The private room was bright, the machines beeped softly, and the care was, as promised, the best. "Mija," Elena said, her eyes bright and knowing, "you look different." "I'm just tired, Ma," Lena said, arranging the flowers she'd bought from the lobby gift shop. "No," Elena insisted, patting the bed. "Come, sit. You're not just tired. You're glowing. Is it that nice, Mr. Moretti? The nurse told me he's paying for all of this." Lena stiffened. "Ma, he's my boss. It's a very generous employee benefit." Elena smiled, a wise, maternal look. "I have been poor, Lena, but I have never been blind. Men like that do not have generous benefit plans. They have reasons. And I see the way you're looking. You're scared, but you're not sad. Not anymore." "Ma, it's not like that," Lena insisted, her face flushing. "Just be careful. Mija, a man who can give you this," she gestured to the room, "can also take everything. Make sure he's giving it for you." Lena denied it, of course. She denied it to her mother, and she tried to deny it to herself. But her heart, which had been frozen in a state of terrified survival for so long, was beginning to thaw, and it scared her more than Dante's coldness ever had. That night, she went back to Vesper. She had to. She was still an employee. The moment she walked into the dressing room, the atmosphere curdled. The new policy had made her a pariah. The other girls gave her a wide, fearful berth, as if she were royalty or diseased, all except one. Cassia was waiting for her. her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed to slits. She'd been drinking. "Well, well," Cassia sneered, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Look who it is. The ice princess finally melted. Or should I say, the whore finally got her price." Lena stopped, her hand on her locker. "Don't, Cassia." "Don't what?" Cassia shoved away from the wall, stepping into Lena's path. "Don't tell the truth? We all know what's going on. The security policy. The private cars. You think you're special?" "I'm just trying to work. Leave me alone." "You are working," Cassia hissed, getting closer. Lena could smell the cheap vodka on her breath. "Just on your back, not on your feet. Tell me, what's he like, huh? The big, scary boss. Does he like it when you—" "Shut up!" Lena's voice was sharp, a crack of thunder in the small room. She was not the same girl who had flinched from the drunk. Cassia laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, she has a voice now. He bought you a spine, too?" She shoved Lena hard. "You think you're better than us? You're just trash he picked up." Lena stumbled back, but she didn't cower. Her anger, fueled by the fear and the confusion and the burgeoning hope, snapped. "You don't know anything about me. Cassia, you don't know anything about him." "I know he bought you." Cassia lunged, her hand raised, nails aiming for Lena's face. Before her hand could connect, a new force entered the room. A hand, the size of a dinner plate, clamped down on Cassia's wrist. It was Sal, the bouncer, his face grim. "That's enough, Cassia," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Get your hands off me!" Cassia shrieked. "Mister, Russo wants to see you," Sal said, his grip unbreakable. He began to drag her, unceremoniously, toward the door. "Now, and bring your things. You're done here." Cassia's face went white. She stopped fighting, her eyes wide with the sudden, cold reality of being thrown out of the Vesper ecosystem. She looked back at Lena, her expression no longer angry, just full of a pathetic, desperate hatred. Sal hauled her out. The dressing room was silent. The other girls stared at Lena, their fear now mixed with a new, terrified awe. She was the one who could get them fired with a single, unspoken word. She was truly, completely alone. Lena's hands were shaking. She turned, grabbed her bag, and walked out. She walked past the bar, past the velvet ropes, and went straight to the private elevator. She didn't bother to knock on his office door this time. Dante was on the phone, his back to her, looking out at the club floor through the one-way glass. He heard her enter and held up a hand, finishing his call. "Handle it," and he hung up and turned, his face impassive. "She's gone," he said. "You fired her," Lena stated. "She put her hands on you. No one puts their hands on you." "I can't do this anymore. Dante—" The words tumbled out, desperate and final. "I can't work on that floor. I can't be that, your protected thing. They all look at me like I'm what she said I was. I can't." She dropped her bag on the floor. "I quit." The silence in the room was heavy. Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. He walked to his desk and leaned against it, his arms crossed. "So you'll go back to some diner?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "You'll work for minimum wage, trying to pay for treatments that cost $20,000 a week. You'll run from men like those Serranos, with no one to watch your back. You'll go back to being alone?" "It's better than being this," she cried. This prized pet in a golden cage." "Then don't be," he said. Lena faltered. "What?" "Don't be a waitress. Don't be a pet." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit down." Hesitantly, she sat. "I've been reviewing the books for the private events," he said, his tone shifting to business. "The VIP bookings, the high roller parties, the political fundraisers. It's a disaster. Nico is a soldier, not a host. The managers are skimming. It's disorganized." He slid a file across the desk. "You're smart. I've seen you. You're organized. Your mother's finances. You've kept her afloat for over a year on nothing. That takes precision." Lena stared at the file, confused. "What are you saying?" "I'm offering you a job," he said. "A real one. private events manager for the Moretti organization. You'll work from the office suite. Here, on this floor. You'll coordinate with the politicians, the whales from out of town. You'll answer to no one but me. The pay is substantial, enough to cover your mother's care indefinitely, and more. Lena was stunned. This wasn't a cage. This was a promotion, a way out. Why? She whispered. Dante's mask softened. He stepped away from the desk and crouched in front of her chair, a gesture of vulnerability that shocked her. He took her hands. They were cold. "'Cause I told you," he said, his voice low and intense. "I don't want to own you. Lena, I want to know you. I can't do that when you're on the floor." And he added, a dark flicker in his eyes, "I can't stand to watch other men look at you down there. It makes me want to break things." He squeezed her hands. "Please, stay. Not as a waitress, as my manager. Stay. With me." She looked into his eyes, seeing the cold, calculated boss and the lonely, possessive man warring with each other. She saw the truth. He was offering her a lifeline. Yes, but he was also binding her to him, pulling her deeper into his world. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she didn't want to leave. She trusted him. More than the doctors, more than the police, more than anyone. "Okay," she breathed. "I'll stay." The change was immediate. Lena moved from the smoky, loud club floor to the silent, pressurized hush of the executive offices. She had a desk, a computer, and access to files that made her stomach clench with anxiety. She was good at the job. She was meticulous, polite, and her quiet, standoffish nature was seen as the height of professionalism by the senators and CEOs she now dealt with. Dante changed, too. He was still the boss, cold and ruthless in his meetings, but with her, in the quiet moments, he was different. He would appear at her desk with a cup of coffee, just the way she liked it, saying nothing before disappearing into his own office. She would be working late, and he would be there, sitting in his office, not working, just watching her. The gaze that had once terrified her now felt like a warm blanket. Their relationship grew in these stolen moments, a brush of his hand against hers as they reviewed a seating chart, a shared, private smile when a difficult client finally agreed to their terms, long glances across the control room, where she now sat with him, learning the business, learning him. He was brilliant, he was ruthless, and he was, to her, astonishingly gentle. About a month into her new job, they closed a massive deal, a 3-day, high-stakes poker tournament for a group of international billionaires. It was Lena who had handled every detail, every demand. It was a flawless success. That night, after the last client had left, Dante found her in her office, packing her bag. "He's wiring the money," Dante said, leaning against the doorframe. He was impressed. "It was a team effort," Alina said, unable to keep the proud smile from her face. "It was you," he countered. "Come to the estate. We should celebrate." Her heart leaped. "Dante, I'm—" "Just dinner, Lena," he said, his voice soft, persuasive. "You've earned it." This time, when she arrived at the estate, the mood was different. The grand library wasn't formal. It was comfortable. The fire was lit. The same soft jazz was playing, and he had a bottle of champagne, not wine. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie gone, his collar unbuttoned. He looked tired and human. They ate a simple, perfect meal that a housekeeper had left for them, and they talked. They talked about the tournament, about a difficult client, about a funny mistake one of the dealers had made. It was normal. It was the most normal, wonderful night of her life. After dinner, they sat on the thick rug in front of the fireplace, the champagne forgotten, nursing glasses of brandy. "You're good at this," he said, watching her face in the firelight. "You're better than I was." "You're not so bad yourself." She smiled. The tension was back, but it wasn't the jagged, nervous energy of before. It was a slow, warm, inevitable pull. He set his glass down and turned to her, his expression serious. My world, it's ugly. Lena, you're seeing the clean part, the offices, the numbers. But there's a part that's dark, full of blood. I know, she said, her voice quiet. I saw it, in the alley. It's going to get worse, he said, his jaw tightening. The Serranos, they're not going to stop. What I'm doing, it puts you in danger. You know that, right? I know. She looked at him, her heart in her eyes. And you're the only one I trust to keep me safe from it. That was all he needed. He leaned in, his hand coming up to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. Lena, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. This time, when he kissed her, she didn't hesitate. She met him halfway. The kiss was different. It wasn't the desperate, hungry clash from the balcony. It was slow and deep and full of a profound, unspoken promise. It was the kiss of a man who was finally, completely, letting someone in. He kissed her like she was precious, his lips learning the shape of hers. She sighed into his mouth, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. He pulled back, just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. Are you sure? He breathed. She didn't answer with words. She pulled him back, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, and kissed him with all the pent-up fear, gratitude, and burgeoning love she had kept locked away. His control broke. A low groan rumbled in his chest. His arms went around her, pulling her onto his lap, his mouth devouring hers. This was the Dante from the alley, the man of pure, possessive power. But this time, it wasn't anger. It was desire. His mouth left hers, trailing a hot, open-mouthed path down her jaw to the sensitive skin of her neck. Lena's head fell back, a soft, breathless moan escaping her lips as his hand slid from her back, over her side, his thumb brushing the swell of her breast through her silk blouse. She arched into him, her body on fire. The tension that had been building for months, the fear, the protection, the stolen glances, the quiet coffees, was finally breaking. He was gentle, yet his touch was firm, possessive. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, his mouth never leaving hers, and carried her from the library, up the grand staircase, into the master bedroom, his bedroom. He laid her on the dark, rich covers, the room lit only by the moonlight pouring in. He didn't rush. He pulled back, his dark eyes blazing with a raw, vulnerable hunger. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands worshipping every inch of skin he uncovered. And when she was bare, she reached for him, her hands no longer trembling, unbuttoning his shirt, her palms pressing flat against the hard, warm wall of his chest. This was her choice. This was her anchor. This was the one man who saw her, the one man who protected her. He came down over her, his hand tangling in her hair, his body covering hers, and in that moment, in the safety of the monster's arms, Lena finally, truly let go. The next morning, Lena woke up tangled in the sheets, her body aching in a way that was both sore and wonderful. Dante was beside her, still asleep, his arm draped possessively over her waist. His face, in sleep, was unguarded, the cold mask gone. He looked young and peaceful. She felt a rush of affection so powerful it stole her breath. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in his silk robe, and padded out onto the balcony. The city was just waking up. She was happy. For the first time in years, she felt truly, completely happy. Miles away, in a damp, cold basement, a man named Marco, one of Dante's most trusted lieutenants, held a burner phone to his ear. "It's done," Marco said, his voice low. "He's lost. He's blinded by the girl. He kept her at the estate all night." The voice on the other end, raspy and cruel, belonged to the head of the Serrano outfit. "Good, the hit is green. But I want the girl first. She's his weakness. You grab her, and he'll walk right into our trap." "She's going to the hospital this morning," Marco said, "to see her mother. It's the perfect time." "Do it," Serrano ordered. "And Marco, don't fail." Lena, unaware, kissed the sleeping Dante on the forehead. She dressed and took the car he provided, a black sedan with a driver he trusted, to St. Jude's. She was humming, her heart full. She stepped out of the car onto the sidewalk, just feet from the hospital's main entrance. "I'll be about an hour, Frank," she said to the driver. "Take your time, Miss Moreno." As Frank turned his head to answer her, a black van, a heavy-duty cargo van, screeched around the corner, jumping the curb. Lena screamed. 2 men in ski masks piled out. It was chaos. One man raised a silenced pistol and fired twice through the driver's window. Frank slumped over the wheel. The other man grabbed Lena. She fought, she screamed, she clawed at his mask, but he was too strong. It was the crossfire, the war Dante had warned her about, and she was in the middle of it. "Got her!" he yelled. He threw her, bodily into the dark, windowless back of the van. The door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. The van's tires smoked as it sped away from the curb. It took less than 15 seconds. Back at the estate, Dante Moretti was in a meeting with his capos, the cold mask firmly back in place. They were discussing the Serrano problem. The door to his library burst open. Nico Russo stood there, his face pale, his phone in his hand. He didn't care about protocol. "Boss," Nico breathed, his voice ragged. Dante's head snapped up. His eyes went cold. Nico had never interrupted him. Not ever. "It's Lena," Nico said. Dante's composed mask didn't just crack. It shattered. It evaporated. He rose from his chair, the movement so sudden and violent that the heavy oak chair crashed to the floor. The temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees. His face was a canvas of pure, cold, incandescent rage. "Where?" he whispered, his voice a deadly, unrecognizable sound. "Is she?" "Ambushed," Nico said, fighting to keep his own voice steady. "Outside the hospital? Frank's dead, the Serranos? They took her. Dante, they took her." Dante Moretti stood perfectly still. The monster she had seen in the alley, the monster he had kept chained, was now, finally, unleashed. He looked at his assembled men, his eyes no longer human. "Find her," he ordered, his voice terrifying in its quiet precision. "Call every man, every associate, every debtor. I want every street in this city locked down. Burn it to the ground, burn them to the ground, and bring her back to me." The darkness of the van was absolute, a suffocating, moving coffin. Lena was thrown onto the hard, metal floor, her head cracking against the wheel well. Stars exploded behind her eyes, the coppery taste of blood filling her mouth. Before she could orient herself, the van was moving, throwing her against the wall as it took a sharp, reckless turn. She was trembling, but not with fear. It was rage, a cold, lucid rage that burned away the panic. They had killed Frank. They had shot him, a kind man who had driven her for weeks, and they had done it without a flicker of hesitation. They had taken her. They had taken her from her mother, from her life, from him. The ride was agonizingly long, a series of jolting stops and sudden accelerations. When the van finally skidded to a halt, the back doors were wrenched open, flooding her eyes with the dim, dusty light of an abandoned building. "Get her out," a rough voice commanded. A man, not one of the ones from the ambush, grabbed her by the arm, the same arm that was bruised from the finance bro at Vesper, and hauled her out. Her legs were weak, and she stumbled, but she didn't fall. She was in a warehouse. The place smelled of rust, stagnant water, and despair. It was vast, empty, save for a few rusted-out barrels and a single pool of harsh light in the center of the concrete floor. They dragged her to a sturdy wooden chair, shoved her into it, and began tying her wrists to the arms with thick, abrasive rope. "Tie her feet, too," the same voice said. A man stepped out of the shadows and into the light. He was older, with a skeletal face and a cruel, thin-lipped smile. A prominent scorpion tattoo snaked up his neck. This was the man from the alley. This was the Serrano who had escaped Dante's wrath. "So," he rasped, circling her, "this is it. This is the little bird that tamed the hawk. Doesn't look like much to me." He backhanded her, the crack of his hand against her cheek echoing in the vast, empty space. Lena's head snapped to the side, her cheek screaming in protest. She tasted blood again, but she didn't cry. She slowly turned her head back and stared at him. Her eyes filled with a pure, undiluted hatred that made him pause. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Ooh, a fighter. I like that. Moretti likes them with spirit. Makes them more fun to break." "He's going to kill you," Lena said, her voice a low, steady vibration. It wasn't a threat, it was a prophecy. "He's going to try," the man sneered, "but he's not going to get the chance. See, we're not just going to kill him. We're going to cripple him. We're going to take his money, his territory, and his pretty little toy." He leaned in, his breath hot and foul. "And we're going to do it with his own right hand." Lena's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" The Serrano leader grinned, enjoying the moment. He pulled out a burner phone and dialed a number. "Yeah, it's me. We got her. She's secure at the docks. Warehouse 10. Just like you said, Marco. Easiest grab I ever made." Lena stopped breathing. Marco. She knew Marco. Everyone knew Marco. He was one of Dante's most trusted capos, a man who had been with the Moretti family for 20 years. He was at the estate, in the meetings. He was family. Yeah, the Serrano leader was saying. "Just make sure you do your part. When he gets the call, you lead him here, but you lead him to the wrong warehouse. Send him to 8. My men will be waiting. By the time he figures it out, we'll be long gone. And so will she." He hung up and looked at Lena, his eyes glittering. "See, your boss is a fool. He's so blinded by a piece of skirt that he let a snake into his own bed. He's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet." The betrayal was a physical blow, worse than the slap. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was an execution. And she was the bait. The Moretti estate was no longer a home, it was a war room. Dante stood at the head of the massive, antique library table, which was now covered in street maps, satellite imagery, and a dozen burner phones. His rage was not the hot, explosive anger of a lesser man. It was a cold, dark vacuum. It was a void that pulled all the light and all the air out of the room. His capos, men who had seen and done terrible things, were visibly terrified of him. "Nico," Dante said, his voice a low, perfectly controlled monotone. "We traced the van's plates," Nico reported, his face grim. "Stolen. We have men sweeping every Serrano-controlled block in the city. Nothing. They've gone to ground." "He's wrong," Dante said. "Boss? He's looking for a Serrano rat line. This isn't a Serrano move. It's too clean, too precise. They knew her schedule. They knew Frank's route. They knew the response time." He looked at the faces around the table, his eyes as dead and cold as a shark's. This was inside. "One of you." A heavy, terrified silence fell over the room. "Marco," Dante said, his gaze landing on the lieutenant. "You're with me. The rest of you. Lock down your territories. I want a perimeter on this entire city. Nothing gets in or out without my say. Move." The capos scrambled, relieved to be dismissed. Only Marco and Nico remained. "Boss, what's the plan?" Nico asked. "The plan," Dante said, "is that we were betrayed." He walked over to Marco, who was attempting to look calm. "And the Serranos are arrogant. They'll use our own infrastructure against us. They'll hide her somewhere they think we'd never look. One of our properties." "The docks?" Marco suggested, his voice a fraction too high. "We have those warehouses, number 8, number 10. They're mostly empty." Dante's eyes narrowed. "That's a good thought, Marco." He turned to Nico. "Get the teams. We're hitting the docks." Marco smiled, a thin, tight-lipped expression. "I'll lead the second team. Boss, we'll hit 8, you hit 10. Cover more ground." "No," Dante said, pulling a custom-made pistol from a drawer and checking the magazine. "You'll be with me. On point." He slid the gun into the holster beneath his suit jacket. "I want you where I can see you." Marco's smile faltered. The convoy of matte black armored Suburbans moved through the night without lights. There were no sirens, no chaos. This was a surgical operation, Dante's full security detail, 20 men deep, all ex-special forces, were armed with suppressed rifles and body armor. Dante sat in the lead vehicle, his face a mask of stone. He was staring at his phone, which was tracking a tiny, flashing red dot, a dot that was moving steadily toward Warehouse 10, a dot that was coming from the diamond and sapphire necklace he had given Lena 2 nights ago, telling her it was a celebration present. He had lied. It was a tracker. He knew exactly where she was, and he knew exactly who had betrayed her. They pulled up 2 blocks from the warehouse, the vehicles gliding to a stop. "Nico, you take half the men," Dante ordered, his voice low in the comms. "Set a perimeter. No one gets out, no one. The rest of you, with me." He looked at Marco. "You're up front." Marco's face was pale, slick with sweat. "Boss, this is a bad idea. We should wait for—" "Now, Marco." The team moved like shadows, stacking up on the warehouse's side entrance. Dante, at the front, didn't hesitate. He kicked the steel door off its hinges. The first 2 Serrano guards inside didn't even have time to raise their weapons before they were neutralized by Dante's men. Smoke grenades filled the cavernous space. Shouts of panic and confusion erupted from the Serranos. They had been expecting Dante at Warehouse 8. They were unprepared, outmanned and outgunned. "Clear!" Dante's team leader yelled as they swept the main floor. "Boss upstairs!" Dante took the metal staircase 3 steps at a time. He heard a door slam. He kicked it open. The scorpion-tattooed Serrano was there, his face a mask of shock and rage. He had a gun to Lena's head. She was still tied to the chair, her cheek bruised and swollen, but her eyes were on Dante. They were filled with terror, but also with a fierce, burning faith. "One more step! Moretti!" Serrano screamed, pressing the barrel to her temple. "I swear to God, I'll blow her head off." "Marco," Dante shouted, not taking his eyes off Lena. "Take the shot!" This was the test. Marco, standing just behind Dante, raised his pistol. He was shaking. He looked at Dante, at Serrano, and at Lena. He knew he was trapped. I can't, boss," Marco stammered. "He's got her covered." "Take the shot," Dante repeated, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Serrano laughed. "Your man doesn't have the guts, Moretti. You lose, it's over." "You're right," Dante said. In one fluid, impossible motion, Dante drew his own weapon. He didn't fire at Serrano. He fired behind him. He shot Marco twice in the chest. Marco collapsed, his eyes wide with shock. The sound, the sudden, violent betrayal of the other side, made Serrano flinch. It was all Dante needed, a 1-second opening. Dante's second and third shots were precise, one in Serrano's shoulder, spinning him around, the next in his gun hand, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. Dante was across the room before Serrano even hit the ground. He didn't spare the man a glance. He went straight to Lena, his knife appearing in his hand. He sliced through the ropes on her wrists, his hands trembling. He cut her feet free. She didn't wait. The moment her hands were loose, she launched herself at him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face burying in his chest. She was sobbing, deep, gulping, agonizing sounds of pure relief. Dante dropped the knife and wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him. He was shaking. The cold, empty void was gone, replaced by a fear so profound it was paralyzing. He held her, his hand tangled in her hair, his face pressed to her head. He was alive. She was alive. Nico appeared in the doorway, his gun drawn. He took in the scene. Marco dead on the floor, Serrano bleeding out, and his boss, the iron-willed head of the Moretti family, holding the girl as if she were the only thing keeping the world from ending. Dante kissed her forehead, his lips brushing her skin. "No one," he whispered, his voice thick and raw, "takes you from me." He scooped her up, cradling her in his arms as if she weighed nothing, and carried her out of that place of death, past his waiting men, and into the safety of the night. The library at the estate was silent, save for the crackle of the fire, Dante had carried her in, bypassing the staff, and had not let her go until her feet were on the soft Persian rug. She was in shock, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, sitting on the sofa. Dante was kneeling in front of her, his suit jacket gone, his tie loosened. "This is gonna sting," he said, his voice impossibly gentle. He was dabbing an antiseptic wipe on the cut on her cheek. His hands, the same hands that had just put 2 bullets in a man's chest, were tender. He was focused on the small wound with an intensity that was almost painful to watch. He finished, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. He looked at the rope burns on her wrists, his jaw tightening, a fresh wave of fury in his eyes. He gently applied a salve, his touch light as a feather. The adrenaline was gone, the dam of her control, the one that had held her together in that warehouse, finally broke. A sob tore from her throat, a raw animal sound of pure, unadulterated terror. The reality of it all, Frank, the van, the chair, Marco's betrayal, the gun to her head, crashed down on her. "Dante!" she cried, her voice shattering. "I've got you," he said, his voice thick. He dropped the first aid kit and pulled her off the couch, onto the rug, wrapping his arms around her as she collapsed against his chest. "I've got you. You're safe. You're home. I'm right here." She clung to him, weeping, her fists clutching his shirt. She wept for Frank, for her mother, for the life she had lost, and for the sheer, terrifying miracle of being alive. He just held her. He rocked her gently, his hand stroking her hair, his own face a mask of agony. He let her pour all her terror and all her grief onto him, absorbing it, taking it as his penance. He had done this. His world had done this to her. She cried until she had nothing left, until she was just empty, hiccuping breaths against his chest. She pulled back, her eyes red and swollen, and looked at him. He was her rescuer, her protector, her captor, her monster, her love. She reached up, her trembling hand cupping his jaw. "You came," she whispered. "Always," he breathed, his forehead resting against hers. This time, there was no hesitation. She pulled his face to hers, and their kiss was a collision. It was not the slow discovery of the first time, or the tender promise of the second. This was a desperate, frantic, claiming. It was the kiss of 2 people who had stared into the abyss. It was raw and wet with her tears, and tasted of blood and fear and relief. His mouth was bruising, possessive, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her impossibly closer. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her body molding to his. He didn't carry her to the bedroom. He laid her down on the thick rug, in the warm, safe glow of the firelight. Their lovemaking was not slow. It was urgent, desperate. A frantic affirmation of life. It was a need to erase the cold, hard floor of the warehouse, the abrasive ropes, the smell of rust. It was his hands, mapping her body, reassuring himself she was whole. She was here. It was her hands, on his back, his shoulders, his face, proving he was real, that he had come for her. He was a man starving, and she was his only sustenance. She met his hunger with her own, a desperate need to be held, to be claimed, to be marked as his and his alone. She cried out his name, a breathless moan of release and comfort, as he arched into him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. It was a ferocious, desperate, and profoundly comforting act. It was the 2 of them, battered and broken, finding solace in the one place they could, each other. Afterward, they lay tangled, their breathing harsh in the quiet room. The fire was dying, and the first gray light of dawn was beginning to creep in. Lena lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart, the sound that had anchored her. "Dante," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'm here." She raised her head, looking at his face. The cold mask was gone. He was just a man who had just saved her life. "Leave this," she begged, her voice small, fragile. "Please, for me, for us, this world, The guns, the betrayals, the blood. It will kill us. It will kill you. And I can't survive losing you, please. Dante, leave it. The question hung in the air, a fragile, impossible hope. Dante looked at her, his eyes filled with an agony she had never seen. He saw the life she wanted, the small house, the safety, the peace, and he saw the life he was bound to, the blood, the honor, the empire. He couldn't answer. He couldn't lie to her, and he couldn't give her the one thing she asked for. He just pulled her closer, his hand gripping the back of her head, and held her tight. The silence was his answer, and it was a new kind of pain, a quiet, cold dread that settled in her heart. 2 days later, Marco's body was found in the trunk of a car in Serrano territory, a message from the Moretti family. Dante, however, was already moving. The fear of losing Lena had done something to him. It had cracked his foundation. His father's words about emotion being a weakness were wrong. His love for Lena, his fear for her, was the only thing that had allowed him to see Marco's betrayal. It had been his strength. But it had also been his greatest vulnerability. He couldn't have both. He couldn't have her and have the empire. He began the purge. "Nico, shut down the docks," he ordered, his voice flat. Shut them down, boss. That's half our untracked revenue. Shut it down, all of it, the shipping, the smuggling, the protection rackets. We're out. Sell the warehouses. But Dante. And the loan sharking? We're done. Call in the debts, take what we can get, and close the books. Nico was stunned. That's the family business, Dante. That's everything. No, Dante said, looking at a picture on his desk. It was a candid photo. Lena in her office, smiling at something on her computer. It's a liability. We're going legitimate. The clubs, the hotels, the casinos. That's the business now. He was dismantling a 100-year-old legacy of violence, piece by piece. Lena never went back to the Vesper, not even to the office. She couldn't. The bullet hole in Frank's window was a permanent, searing image in her mind. She walked into the 12th floor wing of St. Jude's, her face pale but set with a new, quiet determination. "Ma," she said, sitting by the bed. Her mother was stronger. The new treatments were working. "Mija, I was so worried. They wouldn't tell me." "I'm okay, Ma. I'm okay." Lena took her mother's hand. "I'm not going back to the club. I'm done." "But the money, Lena." "The money will be fine," Lena said, a statement of fact. "I'm going to be here, with you, full time. I'm going to get you through this." She had made her choice. She couldn't ask him to leave his world, but she couldn't stay in it either. She quit. She sent a simple one-line email to Dante's private account. "I'm staying with my mother. I can't come back. I'm sorry." He didn't reply, but his protection, his support, never wavered. It was just invisible. The hospital bills vanished. A new car, a sensible, safe sedan, appeared in the hospital parking garage. The keys left with a note at the nurse's station. Groceries were delivered to the hospital for her. He was supporting her from a distance, giving her the peace she had begged for. Even though it meant he had to be alone to do it, he was letting her go, to keep her safe. The seasons turned. Summer's oppressive heat in Steelgrave City bled into a crisp, cool autumn, and then into the biting cold of winter. The neon lights of the Vesper, the smell of cigar smoke, the thrum of the bass, it all felt like a lifetime ago. A dark, chaotic dream that belonged to someone else. Lena's new life was quiet. It was small. And it was safe. The house was a 2-bedroom cottage, nestled 20 miles outside the city limits, rented under a name that wasn't hers. It was surrounded by a small yard and, beyond that, a deep, quiet wood. The invisible hand of Dante Moretti had arranged it, Lena knew, just as she knew the sensible sedan in the driveway had been paid for in cash, and that her mother's mounting medical bills were intercepted and settled before they ever reached her mailbox. Elena Moreno was in remission. The aggressive, expensive, and experimental treatment that Dante had arranged had worked a miracle. The gaunt, pale woman who had been tethered to a hospital bed was gone. In her place was a woman who was regaining her strength, a woman who sat in the small kitchen, humming as she chopped vegetables. Her hair, thin but present, growing back in soft, dark curls. Life settled into a routine of profound, healing mundanity. Lena would wake to the sound of birds, not sirens. She would make coffee, read to her mother, take walks in the woods, and learn to cook the recipes her mother had written down years ago. She was a full-time caregiver, and in that role, she was healing herself. But the quiet had a presence. It was hollow. At night, when her mother was asleep, Lena would sit by the window, staring at the distant faint glow of Steel Grave City on the horizon. She would think of him. She had asked him to leave that world, and he had, in his own way, forced her to leave it. He had given her the safety she'd begged for, but he had not come with her. He had respected her email, her silence. He had not called. He had not visited. He had simply provided. She missed him. It was a sharp, physical ache in her chest, a longing that she couldn't rationalize. She missed his intensity, his calm, his dangerous focus. She missed the way his dark eyes would soften, just for a fraction of a second. When he looked at her, she missed the terrifying, absolute safety she'd felt only in his arms. She had nightmares, not of the warehouse, but of him. Nightmares where he was in trouble, where the Serranos had returned, where his decision to dismantle his father's empire had cost him his life. She would wake, her heart hammering, and check her phone, scanning the Steelgrave news feeds for any mention of a mob war, a shooting, a car bomb. But there was nothing. The city was quiet. The crime wave she had been caught in had receded, the Serrano outfit seemingly vanishing, the Moretti family fading from the headlines. It was as if he had pulled his entire organization and himself back into the shadows. She was safe, but she was incomplete. She had her mother, but her heart was still in that library, in the arms of a man who was both a monster and a saint. The Moretti estate was silent. The grand library, once the nerve center of a criminal empire, was now just a room full of old books. Dante Moretti had stepped back. He was a ghost in his own life, a king who had begun the slow, arduous process of abdicating his throne. He had spent the last 6 months performing surgery on his family. It was a bloody, brutal, and thankless task. He had severed the violent appendages, the loan sharking, the smuggling, the street-level rackets that his father had built. He had cut off capos who refused to adapt, men who, like Marco, had believed power only came from the barrel of a gun. He had consolidated his assets into the legitimate businesses, the hotels, the new construction projects, the high-end casinos that blurred the line between crime and capitalism. He was legitimizing, not for the law, but for her. His chosen successor was Nico Russo. It was a choice that had shocked everyone, including Nico himself. "Dante, you're making a mistake," Nico had argued, standing in the penthouse office that Dante rarely used anymore. "I'm a soldier, a manager, I'm not a CEO. "You're loyal," Dante had replied, signing a stack of papers that transferred ownership of a shipping depot to a neutral third party. "You're the only one I ever trusted who didn't see it as a weakness. You saw her. You saw Lena. And you didn't see a toy. You saw a liability. Yes, but you did what I asked. You protected her. You have integrity. Nico, it's buried deep, but it's there." "And you?" Nico asked. "What will you do? Sit in that empty house and count your clean money?" Dante's pen had paused. He looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the hills far beyond the city, in the direction of her cottage. "I'm going to try," he said, "to be a man someone can build a life with." "She's not coming back, boss. You let her go." "I had to," Dante said, his voice quiet. "She's the only thing I've ever been afraid to lose, and the only way to keep her safe was to not keep her at all." But the days were empty. The silence of the estate was a torment. He would walk the halls, his footsteps echoing, and see her everywhere. He saw her on the balcony, her hand pressed to his chest. He saw her in the library, laughing over a glass of champagne. He saw her on the rug before the fire, her body arched into his, her voice crying his name. He was the most powerful man in Steelgrave, and he was hollowed out. He had the world, and he had nothing. He had given her 6 months for her mother to heal, 6 months for him to clean the blood from his hands, to build a wall between his past and his future. He couldn't wait any longer. To be without her was no longer survival. It was just a different kind of death. It was an evening in early spring. A soft, gentle rain was falling, blurring the edges of the trees, making the world feel small and enclosed. Lena was on the porch, wrapped in a thick sweater, nursing a cup of tea. Her mother was inside, asleep, her health stable, her future bright. Lena was watching the rain, lost in thought, when the headlights appeared. They were not the headlights of a local. They were the bright, piercing beams of an expensive car, one that moved with a familiar, predatory grace. A matte black sedan, not a Maybach or a sports car, but something understated and powerful, stopped at the end of her gravel driveway. Lena's heart stopped. She stood up, her teacup rattling in its saucer. The car door opened, and he stepped out. He wasn't the mafia boss. He wasn't the king in the bespoke suit. He was just Dante. He wore dark jeans, boots, and a simple gray wool coat. His hair was damp from the rain, and he looked nervous. His shoulders were tense, his hands jammed into his pockets. He hadn't brought any guards. He was alone. He walked slowly up the path, his eyes fixed on her. He stopped at the bottom step of the porch, looking up at her, his face a mask of raw, vulnerable hope. In one hand, he held a bouquet of flowers, not extravagant roses, but a simple, wild bunch of white lilies and freesias, the kind she'd once mentioned she liked in passing. In his other hand, he held a plain manila envelope. "Lena," he said. His voice was rough, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "Dante," she breathed, "what are you doing here?" It's been 6 months, he said, as if that explained everything. He held out the flowers. "These are for you." She stepped down, her hand trembling, and took them. Her fingers brushed his. The contact was an electric shock, a jolt of life. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe for you." "I don't care about that," he said. He held up the envelope. "This is for you, too." She took it, confused. She opened the unsealed flap and pulled out the documents inside. It was a deed to this house, this property, and it was in her name, Lena Moreno, not a shell company, not an alias. She looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning anger. "What is this? Are you buying me again, buying my silence, paying me off?" "No," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion she had never heard from him. "God, no. It's yours. It's done. It's clean. It's a gift. It's freedom. If you never want to see me again, if you want to sell it and move to the other side of the world, you can. It's yours. I needed you to have it. I needed you to be free, truly free, not just of your mother's bills, but of me." She stared at the paper and then at him. He was giving her the ultimate choice, the power to leave, for good. "And what if I don't want to leave?" she asked, her voice quiet, steady. Dante's gaze snapped to hers. "What?" "This house, this quiet, it's safe. It's everything I asked for. And it's so lonely, Dante. It's been the longest 6 months of my life." He took a step up, his foot on the porch, his face level with hers. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, the words a raw admission torn from his soul. "I've tried, I've dismantled everything. I'm not the man I was. I'm trying to be someone who deserves to stand on this porch, but Lena, I am nothing without you. I'm just an empty cold thing. I don't want to be alone anymore. The dam in her heart broke. The loneliness, the fear, the longing, it all rushed out. "I'm done waiting," she whispered. That was all he needed. He closed the distance, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. The rain was falling around them, but they were in the eye of the storm. "Lena," he breathed, his forehead pressing against hers. And then he kissed her. It was a kiss of profound, agonizing relief. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss of their past. It was a kiss of surrender. It was slow and deep and tasted of the rain and the 6 long months of their separation. It was a promise. Lena's hands, still clutching the flowers, came up to tangle in his damp hair, pulling him closer. She dropped the deed, the paper fluttering to the wet porch floor. Forgotten. She didn't want freedom. She wanted him. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her, pulling her flush against the solid, warm wall of his chest. He was real. He was here. He was hers. His mouth trailed from her lips, pressing desperate, reverent kisses along her jawline, down the column of her neck. He wasn't a boss claiming an asset. He was a man worshiping his savior. "I love you," he murmured against her skin, the words a secret he had kept locked away his entire life. "I love you so much." "I love you," she cried, her voice breaking, her hands gripping his shoulders. They stood there for a long time, on the small porch, under the soft spring rain, their breaths sinking in a moment of perfect, absolute stillness. The war was over. They were home. The next morning, Lena woke in her own bed. The house was quiet. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it, the car, the rain, the confession. But the scent of freesias filled the room from the bouquet, which now sat in a vase on her dresser, and the smell of fresh coffee was drifting from the kitchen. She slipped out of bed, pulling on her robe, her heart pounding a new, happy rhythm. He was in her kitchen. Dante Moretti, the man who had commanded an empire, was standing at her stove, looking profoundly awkward, holding a spatula. He had found eggs in the fridge and was attempting to make them. He had taken off his coat, and his gray sweater was rumpled. He had slept on her small, uncomfortable couch, and he was smiling. I'm not very good at this," he admitted, gesturing to the slightly burned scramble. "It's perfect," she said, walking up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his back. He was warm and solid and real. He turned in her arms, his own wrapping around her, and kissed her, "Good morning." It was a soft, sleepy, domestic kiss. It was the most passionate kiss of her life. "My mother is still sleeping?" he said. "I was quiet." "Dante?" "I know," he said, his expression serious. "I know this is a beginning, and I'm not perfect, Lena. The world I'm from, it doesn't just go away. There will still be complications." "I know," she said, mirroring his words. "I don't care. As long as I have you, I don't care." He smiled, a true, unguarded smile that lit up his dark eyes. He kissed her forehead. "I have to go. I have one last thing to settle. With Nico." "You're coming back?" she asked, the old fear creeping in. "Tonight," he promised. "And every night, if you'll have me." "Go," she said, pushing him gently. "Settle it. I'll be here." He left, and the house felt empty again. But it was a different kind of emptiness. It was anticipation. It was promise. Lena turned to the coffee he had made, and that's when she saw it. Sitting on the kitchen table, next to the salt and pepper shakers, was a small, square, black velvet box. Her breath hitched, her hands suddenly trembling again. Reached for it. She opened the lid. Inside, it wasn't a massive, gaudy diamond. It was a simple, elegant ring, a flawless, rectangular-cut sapphire, the color of the deep, safe twilight, flanked by 2 small, brilliant diamonds. It was understated and timeless and perfect. Beneath the ring was a small, folded note, the handwriting thick, black, and distinctively his. "If you want me, this life, this love, I'm yours, always." She didn't wait. She didn't call him. She didn't text. She clutched the box in her hand, threw on her shoes and her coat, and ran out the front door. His car was gone, but she knew where he'd be. She ran past the driveway to the edge of the property, where the small yard met the deep, quiet woods. There was a large, ancient oak tree that stood at the entrance to the path. He was waiting there. He hadn't left. He was standing by the tree, his hands in his pockets, his back to her, looking out into the woods. He was giving her time, giving her the space to make the final choice. "Dante!" she called out, her voice clear in the morning air. He turned. His face was tense, terrified. The mafia boss once again reduced to a man, vulnerable and waiting for a verdict. He saw the box in her hand. He saw the tears in her eyes. He didn't have to say a word. She ran. She ran across the damp grass, her feet flying, her heart so full it felt like it would burst from her chest. He met her, his arms opening wide. She launched herself at him, and he caught her, lifting her off the ground, spinning her in a circle. His laugh, a raw, joyful sound she had never heard. She was kissing his face, his jaw, his mouth, her own laughter mixing with her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, always. Yes." He set her down, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching hers, his entire future resting in her gaze. Lena, her hands shaking, opened the box. She took his large, calloused hand, the hand of a killer, the hand of her protector, and placed the ring in his palm. "Ask me," she whispered. He went down on one knee, not as a king, not as a boss, but as a man. He didn't have to say the words. She was already nodding, pulling him to his feet, her mouth finding his. The story ends there, in the quiet of the morning, at the edge of the woods. He took her hand, the ring now firmly on her finger, and together they turned away from the house, away from the distant, faint memory of Steelgrave City. They walked, hand in hand, into the quiet peace of the woods, toward a life they would build together. She worked at the Mafia's club to help her sick mom, never knowing the Mafia boss, the man who watched her from the shadows, would one day become her forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed it. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and let us know. If you love stories like this, please consider subscribing to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories, for more content just like this. And finally, please share your thoughts on Lena and Dante's journey in English. We read every single one. Thank you again.